Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Natural Cycle, where we attempt to solidify the absolute. I'm your host, Trail Talk Nick. We appreciate you joining us. Thanks for tuning in. Today's talk: why do narcissists blame shift their victims of abuse? If you like the content, please subscribe. There's two parts of today's talk. Part one is the pathology of shame and insecurity. And part two, coping mechanism cycles. Part one, the narcissist pathology of shame and insecurity. So, in a gross state of insecurity, narcissists manifest also a gross shame. They're constantly feeling inadequate and the need to overcompensate for that feeling of inadequacy. And when they overcompensate, they've also felt this shame involved. Shame for being not enough, or possibly implicated in not living up to their narcissistic ideal and that narcissistic aesthetic they have engrossed themselves in to constantly get supply off of other people and regulation of their emotions in that narcissistic feeling of supremacy and in emotional regulations of their downtrodden biorhythms. So the narcissist has this pathology where shame and fear and insecurity are all working interconnectedly in a cycle, ultimately all manifesting each other. But the original feeling is a fear. Then comes the shame, and then, a lot of stuff comes out of that. And again, the manifestation of the original insecurity and fear is from them constantly overcompensating. And so, let's say someone points out something to them that creates this feeling of inadequacy, then the shame comes. And it's they're scared to be falling back in the idea of being number one. So that's their personality disorder. I'm sure some people could describe it a lot better, but I'm trying to put forward how their pathology works. So, this pathology is ridden with shame, fear, inadequacy, and gross overcompensation comes from this. to where now, because of these hyper animated psychological cycles, there needs to be some type of adjustment to basically maintain in a volatile state, and again to regulate those emotions for the narcissist. So that brings in part 2. Coping mechanisms and cycles. So this original cycle and the fear, the shame, the guilt even, the inadequacy, this brings the ultimate psychological cycle for the personality disorder. Now, that disorder has to be overcompensated and worked out, and it has to undergo some sort of transformation to where the narcissist can still feel superior, secure, ultra valid, hyper valid. They're always trying to be hyper valid. So this is where part 2 comes in, the coping mechanism cycles. So the coping mechanism cycle becomes the adjustment made. And this is where today's topic comes in. Now, for example, I've used the idea that when the narcissistic injury is incurred, immediately the narcissist will want to contact the person who has inflicted the injury on them and begin the coping mechanism cycle. A lot of times that is transference of the feeling of blame that they have incurred, and they're going to do things like gaslight, put you on that cycle, or the person on that cycle. And they're basically going to transfer the blame over onto the person, blame shift, in a coping mechanism to regulate their emotions again, regain their feelings of superiority, and ultimately cope in the hard psychological reality that they kind of endure. The narcissist is more of an endurist, you know. Life is a very austere thing for them at all times, in a lot of extents. So they're going to begin these coping mechanism cycles, and those are essentially to heal themselves and maintain. Ship was rocking, now they're on steady sails with this now. And so in other situations where, let's say, the narcissist, out of a lack of empathy, just straight up, a very popular thing with narcissists, and I could do another video on this, is the subliminal attack. They're going to give you a look that connotates something psychically with you, and it's an insult, and you're supposed to perceive it in this sort of gesture, but it's all subliminal, and it's done sub rosa, you know. So the narcissists, when they do this, these attacks just on random people, and it could be maybe they incurred an injury narcissistically from that person they attack, or they want to transfer that over. But in their just invalidation campaign, they'll attack a lot of people, to validate themselves. And so that in that instance, they're always going to blame. They're always going to blame shift. The narcissist never what? Takes accountability. And so again, blame shifting is a great tool for them to, not only are they victimizing someone, but they're able to place the blame now on that person and keep that feeling of superiority up, to keep that behavior going. Because as long as they think it's right and kind of doing well, they're not going to just drop it. So the narcissist can attack for a lot of reasons, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with narcissistic injury being incurred, but they will always blame shift. Again, narcissists cannot come into an objective reality, especially to look at themselves objectively. So blame shifting again is a perfect tool. And you got to remember, they're probably feeling a bunch of bad stuff they're blaming on you to begin with. So they're always going to pin that on you, that, oh, this person has made me feel all these bad things. It's their fault. Or, there's, as they say, there's not a guilty person in the prison house, because no one there would own up to accountability. But in the narcissist's mind, they never do that in the real world. And what they get away with, they definitely enjoy. And so the blame shifting, it's a great coping mechanism. It's a great cycle to put on people psychologically. And here's the deal, unfortunately, a lot of people will believe that it is their fault. For example, in the gang stalking, when they stalk you, they make you feel that it's your fault they're doing that to you. And it's a matter of security or something you've done, they have to watch, yada yada. But ultimately, they're feeling a gross field of shame for what they're doing because they know it's wrong. And back in the day, being like a covert spy was a bad thing. But now that's something in society that is rewarded almost. And, snitching. When I went to school, we got these dragonflies out here right now. Very beautiful blue dragonfly. I don't know if the camera's picking that up. But, when I was in school, we did not snitch. And so that's just kind of how that works. I got a guy hiking up here. I'm just going to start filming. Don't want to work anybody into the video today. Well, how you doing, sir? So they blame shift when they abuse. And if they felt it was wrong, they obviously wouldn't do it. So this is why they blame shift. Here's this nice blue dragonfly again. And blame shifting is a coping mechanism cycle. So now we're going to wrap up the video. Thanks, everybody, for tuning us in. Going to do a little bit more walking over here into the pond. And in the video at this nice bench up here. It's a nice meditation platform. So to go back to part one a little bit, ultimately this is all resting inside of their pathology of fear. And to quote Yoda, fear leads to hate, leads to the dark side. That's absolutely true. And, also like when they're hating on you, they blame you for that. That's why they do it. It's something they can blame you and just feel even better. So, back to that original pathology of fear and insecurity in this aesthetic that they must keep on top of it all as the narcissistic supreme, the number one at all times. That creates such a hyper form of insecurity in their pathology, which leads to innumerable coping mechanism cycles. Blame shifting is one of them. Gaslighting, and I wanted to mention in part two also that these coping mechanism cycles are the origin of the trauma bond. So when they do this to someone, as we know, to regulate their emotions, they may glom on to this person in a trauma bond to further regulate their emotions in an abuse cycle, in a coping mechanism cycle. And like I said, that's the origin of the trauma bond, is they need to deal with this somehow. And it's a coping mechanism. It's also a matter of healing themselves, because somewhere they could have incurred some sort of trauma originally, and now they're passing over the trauma bond onto you. So don't always blame the person, just blame the psychology and how it was manifest.